strolling through the local shopping mall on the way home. I stopped in yes, it's a former bookstore that sells educational books and aids to children. But in the back of the store, there is a section where they have compiled a great deal of used books. That's I have found as being worth a peruse. I found many little treasures in there. Some items well over 100 years old, hardback things that perhaps I could talk about later, as well as the benefit of thrifting when it comes to finding reads for your mind or your shelves. The particular item I came across caught me off guard. I was kind of surprised and delighted with it. It's something I have a personal interest in, but not necessarily a treasure as far as the treasure being the item itself. But what it is a paperback book by James Leo Herlihy. And it is, in fact, his most popular novel, The Midnight Cowboy. He's written a couple of other books that some people may be familiar with. One is his 1960 novel, Fall Down, and a 1971 novel known as Season of the Witch. But it's his 1965 novel, Midnight Cowboy, which I guess made its way into the popular conscience of film goers and artsy-fartsy types at the time. Now, this particular publication is copyright 2002. I believe, yes, it's 2002, Jeffrey Bailey, and which brings us to today's reading. In this book, Mr. Bailey gives an introduction to Herlihy's writings, and his, a brief synopsis of his view on both writing and general philosophy concerning love and life. Now, to be perfectly honest with you, I am not familiar with Herlihy's writing at all. But back in 1989, I was profoundly moved and influenced, I guess, or impacted by the film Midnight Cowboy. By that time I was 19, 20 years old, and you know, I mean, controversial and all of these things, but, I had no real interest in it. Not just based on the subject matter, but it was an older movie from the 60s. It was beyond my time by that time, it was the 80s, and my interest in films were not anywhere near something like that. Whatever that means. But, however, in a library one day, I was in fact in there, searching reference material for an essay I was writing on the Renaissance and Leonardo da Vinci, making photocopies, and I was there, in fact, with my young wife, and we were both students who had, at a very young age, just had that is, it turns out that we would have a new addition to our lives in that form of a baby boy. But anyway, that's another thing altogether. At that time, however, we had discovered in that visit to the library that the library was now providing the public with a lot of visual aids, popular movies, and a great deal of music as well. It had probably been like that in the public libraries for quite some time. My visits to the public library from childhood, I wasn't aware of those things, or I perhaps wasn't interested in such things. I don't know if they were stocking videotape at that time. But we thought, oh, that's great. Look, some free entertainment, so why don't we grab a few things here and there. My wife had grabbed some music. And I went to the video section and found a copy of A Midnight Cowboy, among other films. There were a few other films that I just can't recall at the moment, because they didn't really, I suppose it's because they didn't really stand out as much as Midnight Cowboy, which went on, I don't know why, went on to become one of my favorite films of all time. Now, I make that distinction of one of my favorite films of all time. There's all sorts of ways to make that distinction. You can look at cinematography. Some people are more interested in the story behind the movie, that being a book, the actors involved, etc., whatever it is. But for me, the way I've kind of determined whether a book is, or a book, or a movie or a book for that matter, is on my is in that top 10 or 20 list, whatever, is whether or not it's not so much the subject matter, although my connection to the subject matter is, although somewhat remote, definitely I could identify with both of those characters through people I have known and were an important part of my adolescence and period of growing up, if you will. Another story altogether. Another. Oh boy, that's worth a writing. But anyway, outside of that subject matter and any personal connections, I think the thing that struck a chord with me was its dreamy quality. The way images were flashed on the screen in describing it was almost like the filmmaker was. It kind of reminded me of the way, I don't know, the way Frank Zappa in Overnight Sensation would use phrases and undertones that we recognize in advertisement to convey certain ideas in his music. It seemed like the filmmaker would do that with imagery to describe things that were happening in the movie. Like, I remember, like, okay, well, I'll get right down to it concerning what I mean there. There is the first woman Joe Buck lands in beds when he pulls his first hustle when he gets to New York. The failed hustle, that is. But the scene to which him and the women are rolling around on the bed with the remote control on the bed, getting the channels getting changed as they're rolling around on the remote control. Click, click, click. It builds in tension as they climb towards orgasm, and when they orgasm, they show on the screen. It was like I think it was a slot machine that suddenly gave its payout, where all the coins went out the bottom of the machine. Things like that, the imagery. But then there's other things too, like there's there's nothing like it. What do you call that? In writing, you would call it the stream of consciousness that, James Joyce in Ulysses really tapped into, where you're getting into the mind of the person, not just what they're doing and where they're going and who they are, but right into their thoughts. Well, in The Midnight Cowboy, as he's taking that long journey on the bus from Texas towards New York, he's dreaming and imagining and reflecting. All these things are going through his head. We get an introduction to who he is as he's reflecting, and they're just sporadic images of his childhood and later on his teen years and things that happened, his first sexual experience, many things along the way, just the voice of his grandmother talking to him, a scene of him returning from service in the army, sitting on the step knowing that she had passed away, like just flashes of imagery informing the watcher watcher in a dreamy, sleepy-like quality as the bus, just kind of drifts across America. The random pictures that he's seeing from his window of, I guess, billboards and water towers and farmland and all matter of things. The huge stretch of country provides a traveler on a Greyhound bus, that sort of thing. But it just, if anyone has ever been on long bus rides like that, they know that this is a pretty accurate depiction of what occurs in the mind as you're traveling along and the brain kind of drifts. Unless, of course, you're reading a book. Or nowadays, listening to your phone and, there are some things that will forever be with us. But somehow will be lost down the memory hole. And the voraciousness of technology. There's no point in ranting and raving about it, but oh my God, I'm watching a world that's disappearing. And I gotta admit, it saddens me. It really does. There's no point in getting into it. But as one struggles to find out what is worth writing about, it is, of course, these things, these memoirs. But anyway, I digress. In stumbling, I found this book and I thought, oh, that's great. I'd love to get into the book that inspired the movie. And mentioning Bailey, I just like to, read his introduction to that to get us started on this. I've read this introduction this morning, and I thought I'd read it again for recording, for what it's worth. Introduction. We 20th century men are learning because we simply must in order to survive that brotherhood is not an ideal but a necessity. We really are interdependent. We are one organism. It's no poem either. It's a fact of ecology. In our harmony, in our genuine, deep caring for one another, lies our survival. James Leo Herlihy, in an essay from the book Sexual Latitude. Ama et fac, quod vi, St. Augustine advised some 15 years ago. No, you fuck. He blew it. Pardon me. Right? Yeah. Sam. A little retrieval there. Missing a few centuries. Anyway. Ama et fac quo vi, St. Augustine advised some 15 centuries ago. Love and do as you will. Both the has consistently maintained itself as a constructive impulse. The most positive and creative forces instigated in any realm of endeavor can be readily traced to the overwhelming need of human beings to communicate emotionally with their fellows. In our peculiarly psychological age, this need for communication has acquired a more highly personal, wow, drive a nail through my tongue, even, highly personalized aspect. In our peculiarly psychological age, this need for communication has acquired a more highly personalized aspect. Love has become the means, perhaps the only effective means, of salvation from the anonymity of contemporary existence. This search for salvation, which could be defined as the ability to recognize one's face both in the mirror and in the crowd, is the hallmark of 20th century man. The dissection and illumination of this condition is the particular province of the contemporary artist. Personal footnote, I just got that vision of, a newly arrived Joe Buck in New York City where I don't know what street it was they were walking down. One very busy, maybe Fifth Avenue, maybe Broadway. I don't even know. It was so crowded. The people walking on the sidewalk, just so crowded. And it's a back shot where the viewer is, witnessing this crowd of people walking down the sidewalk. And, with what we just read here, picking a face out of the crowd, you see, your eyes focus in on Joe Buck in that crowd. Like, you know him now. He's part of your cosmology as a movie viewer. Like, you know what I mean? Anyway, just the scene jumped out at me. It's an interesting movie. Back to it. Because he is very much a product of our anonymous age, and yet affirms and transmits a belief in the efficacy of love, Herlihy deserves an analysis and an appreciation, and he has yet to be fully accorded. His works are filled with the subtleties of a brilliant perception in which the inherent comedy and sadness of simply being are conveyed without pretense. He is aware of the inexorable melancholy of life, but never surrenders to it. His writing is sparked by an imagination that feeds upon his concern for people, and by a love of life which never allows the candid imagination to degenerate into artifice. Herlihy's books brim with delightful specifics, so ideally suited to their subject, and so convincingly presented that they seem to come out of one's own memory. The interaction of characters who come alive through the humane nuances of Herlihy's language create in the reader a sense of loss and depletion, a feeling of true catharsis. Upon finishing one of his books, one is both saddened and, in a strange way, invigorated. Invariably, the source of this catharsis is Herlihy's perception of love. His books all relate the durability of love and its ramifications, both privately as sexual response and socially as reflections of the political order. The loss or misuse of love is a haunting theme in all of his works, as is the regenerative power of a consistent love. Each of his major works reiterates the penetrating forcefulness of genuine caring, without which there is only emptiness and loneliness. Herlihy belongs to a distinguished line of American writers who may be termed native because their artistic sustenance depends upon their native and physical environment. Through his perception of life as the poetry of being and his use of language less as explication than as a vehicle to express the continuum of emotion, he is a de facto heir of the tradition of Whitman, Hart Crane, Sinclair Lewis, and Tennessee Williams. Having been spawned by the contemporary American scene, Herlihy's work flows from and returns to the same source, the consciousness that defines and nurtures the national entity. In many ways, he is the prototype of that writer, peculiar to the American tableau, who functions outside a literary establishment or hierarchy, and whose work becomes a mirror of the communal soul. He is a writer who captures from his own experience a significant and abiding moment in the experience of his race. This is not to say that Herlihy's work is preponderantly autobiographical, rather than relying upon incidents from his personal past. His writing is a testament to his preoccupation with and his sensitivity toward the experience of others. There is a mystery involved in the writing impulse. There's a compulsiveness about it, he explained in a recent interview. It's like trying to discover what sex is. You can't do it. For me, I know that a book has to be written when one character, one specific being, has moved innocence is seen by Herlihy as the acceptance of the full nature of the self. It is the mating of sensuality and innocence, which the inhibitions of adulthood sadly diminish. Herlihy's adults either suffer from a loss of youth that is synonymous with the loss of innocence, the men and the women whom Joe Black hustles in Midnight Cowboy, or they prove themselves capable of transforming the essence of youth, an expansive and benevolent expression of selfhood, into a motivating life principle. Young or old, his characters all suffer from the American dilemma that places physical youth at a premium while denigrating the moral idealism of the young. They are all victimized by a mythical history in which the pursuit of materialism has been substituted for the pursuit of happiness. The major protagonists of Herlihy's novels all share two primary attributes: a hypersensitivity to their own being that translates to their perception of the world around them, and an abiding desire to realize themselves not only as individuals, but as part of the general environment. There is a naivete about the compulsiveness of the relationship to the mystery of being, in their enthusiasm for life, in their celebration of innocence. But their convictions are so pristine, so near to our innate understanding of truth, that we as readers must celebrate with them. We accept their naivety and mourn its loss. We see through these characters how thoroughly Herlihy is a believer in love as a preternatural instinct. He believes in the predilection of human beings for good. Indifference, cruelty, loneliness, these are true perversions and are viewed as outgrowths of a lack of love. Though his characters are often victims of this lack, an enduring strength that resides within them results not only in their ability to overcome it, but in their compulsion to do so. By loving, they reaffirm the basis of life. They do this without pretense, often without knowing that they are doing it. This through the grace of Herlihy's sparse and evocative prose. While the characters of these books stand very firmly on their own as individuals and are in no way mere prototypes, they do serve to substantiate a premise larger than themselves. The novels all reflect the psychic potence of sexuality and the power of love as both a political and a social force. Aside from being Herlihy's best-known book, Midnight Cowboy is also his masterwork. The character of Joe Buck grew out of something closely akin to what used to be called inspiration, and it is ironic that, as revealed in an earlier quotation, Herlihy's approach to the book was originally marked by a feeling of hesitancy and constraint. Joe Buck exemplifies that literary anomaly, which only succeeds under the direction of a very skilled artist, the anti-hero. By conventional standards, he is simply a loser, a victim of social pressures and conditions who faces life with an optimism that only seems absurd in light of his circumstances. His plight is all the more those same Midwestern middle-class values which were supposed to guarantee material success and, as a consequence, happiness. Although one must note that Joe Buck was disadvantaged from the beginning, orphaned early and raised by a freewheeling, albeit sympathetic grandmother, he is still a believer in the American promise. In a sense, Joe Buck lives the American dream. His fantasies are his reality. The tragedy of the Midnight Cowboy is the gradual and depleting substitution of his dreams for the hardship and deprivations of his New York experience. The disarming simplicity of his desire to realize his fantasies and give pleasure to others in the only way he knows, by lending them his body, combines most poignantly with his heading for the big city in pursuit of fame and fortune, armed only with an innate virility and a naive approach to augmenting his appeal to city women by assuming the costume and posture of a cowboy. Despite Joe Buck's unorthodox approach to life, his confusion of fantasy and reality, and his socially unacceptable profession, he is very much an empathetic entity. He is made real to us because Herlihy portrays him with the power of inexorable tenderness and concern. It is Herlihy who makes the improbable, the platonic love affair between Joe Buck, the strapping bisexual hustler, and the petty criminal invalid Ratso Rizzo so very probable. In Ratso Rizzo, Joe Buck finds, if not an alter ego, at least a pragmatic complement to his own fanciful nature. Theirs is a relationship of survival and necessity, by a symbiotic understanding and camouflage by a habitual gruffness. By truthfully exploring the raw nature of their friendship, Herlihy has accomplished a rare and distinguished feat. He has capsulized the compelling need of human beings for one another, and in the process has given us one of the greatest love stories in our literature. Few writers stand as entirely unembarrassed before the fact of love, which is, after all, an overwhelming fact. Few writers maintain a more abiding faith in the conviction that men live in a symbiotic relationship to each other. This belief in the purity and ubiquity of love is the mainstay of Herlihy's work. It provides the central motivation for his characters and is the source of his power to affect an appreciative readership. For Herlihy, writing is itself an act of love. Jeffrey Bailey